All right, welcome back. So in this video, we're now going to start chapter 12, right? So I just call it Charging Techniques Part 2. And in this chapter, we're going to now look at different or alternative sort of ways of charging, which are kind of just variations on what we already learned, but they're more or less like special cases, right? Or special or unique conditions of charging. Right, so they're just kind of special cases of subconscious activity where charging kind of works a little differently from the way we described. So it's kind of similar to how when something's very new to you and has no negative memory at all, the way the subconscious charges is different. So it's a special case of charging. Right, we looked at the general case of charging. So there are actually other special cases outside of when something's completely new, which we haven't talked about. So we're going to look at those in this chapter. We're also going to look at other parameters related to charging, which have to do with the role your attention plays, and something I call the burst action, right, which allows you to even control your subconscious charge even more, right? I just thought it made more sense to go over the general rules of charging before discussing those. All right, so in this specific video, though, we're going to now talk about something that I call a not statements, or not statements, and we're going to talk about something I call subconscious dissonance, right? So I think it makes more sense to talk about this before getting into the role your attention plays, which I think we'll talk about next video. So what is a not statement, right? So when I use that term, right, what do I mean by that? More specifically, we're going to talk about not statements in terms of your intention. So if you ever been in a conversation, right, and let's say you're a kid, right? It happens a lot when we're kids in middle school, right? We want to hold a conversation and maybe we want to impress friends or students that we've just met, and we don't want to say something stupid, right? Or we don't want to say something uncool or unfunny, right? How does that manifest in the mind, right? Well, generally, your conscious mind or your negative mind would produce an intention whose command component says, don't say something funny. So if I'm in a conversation, like as a kid, and I say, don't say something uncool, don't say something stupid, while I'm trying to hold a conversation, what's actually happening is I'm producing an intention whose command component says, don't do this. And that's basically what I want to talk about in this video. Like, I want to look at how your subconscious responds to those kinds of commands. Because if I hold the intention that says, do this, or the one we gave a lot of times before is like, let's say I'm going to win, or I'm going to accomplish this, I'm going to win this sports game or whatever, we pretty much determine that your subconscious responds to that kind of command at the ambition frequency, and it charges up to alter your perception to feel like you're going to win the game. We haven't talked too much about charging for performance yet, but that will help you with your performance too. So that one is a little easier to understand, but how does your subconscious respond when you say don't do something, don't do this, make sure I don't do this, right? That's basically what I want to analyze. And to just go over this first point, when the command component of your intention says not to do something, I just call that a not statement, right? And to go over this first point, it says not statements from the conscious mind are intentions whose command component tells the subconscious not to do something. So when you're in conversation, you hold the intention, don't say something stupid, the command component is basically expressing a not statement. Or you could just say the intention is expressing a not statement, right? And so again, how does the subconscious respond to that? Those kinds of statements. Well, we're going to go for a little bit of math here, or a little bit of set theory, because basically what I want to establish with this statement is to demonstrate that a not statement is not a direct command, right? It's not clear. There are a million ways to satisfy a not statement. So it's an unclear command. It's not a clear directive on what to do. And we're basically just going to establish this framework, and then we're going to look at how the subconscious actually responds to those commands, right? So this little bit of math here basically just means, it reads like this. So this means that A is a member of the set of real numbers. So the set of real numbers is just all the numbers from negative infinity to positive infinity, right? And that might be as opposed to complex numbers. Complex numbers would be like a plus bi, which is a two-dimensional space, but this is just one-dimensional space, and it's just A is just some random number, who knows what, who knows which one, so it's a variable. Well, A is a member of the set of real numbers. Then we could say another statement, we could say not A. So this little tilde right here means not A. So that's a not statement, right? Well, what does it mean? If this is A, what does not A mean? Well, in logic theory, that would basically mean if A is a set of real numbers, we could basically just say A is the U. So this little U right here means union, so it means the combination. And these two, it is, if you don't know math like that. If you know math, this is very basic. But this set right here, just these two parentheses, means open set. It just means, this is just an interval. So this interval right here means all the numbers from negative infinity to A, whatever number that is. All the numbers from negative infinity to A, but not including A in the set. And then you combine that with all the numbers from A to positive infinity without actually including A in the set, right? So in other words, it's just all the numbers from negative infinity to positive infinity except for A, which is obviously a very large set, right? So not A is just everything, right? You know what I mean? It's every other number except for A. So in other words, it's not very specific, right? There are a million ways, in this case, an infinite number of ways to not be A. So in other words, what I'm trying to demonstrate there, is that a not statement is not a clear directive. It's very easy to not be something when the set of possible things is extremely large. And that's very similar to how we can think of the subconscious mind. When you produce a not statement, the not statement itself isn't very clear. Now, the subconscious does respond in a very specific way. It doesn't respond like this. But I want you to think of it this way, is the conscious mind mainly is the one that when you produce a not statement, it makes sense to the conscious mind, but it doesn't make any sense to the subconscious. Well, the subconscious doesn't perceive it in the same way the conscious mind does. And the reason for that is because of this. So the subconscious lacks the necessary rationality to interpret not statements. And so technically, right, so very technically and logically, in terms of set theory and things like that, this is what a not statement really means. So when you're not something, it just means there's a million ways to not be something. Excuse me, if the set is very large. And so when you express a statement using a not statement, it requires rationality and logic to make sense of it, right? So let's say I tell you, to not pick something up, right? Let's say you're thinking about picking something up and I say, don't pick that up. What did I really mean with that statement? Well, it's very clear to the negative mind, right? The negative mind likes commands in that form, in a very direct form through spoken language or some form of communication. But there are a million ways to carry out that command such that I still satisfy it. If I don't pick that one thing up, I could pick this up, I could pick that up, I could go outside and pick something up, right? So that's not what you mean when you say don't pick it up. It's very clear that you just mean don't pick up that whatever I was pointing to, right? But in order to interpret it that way, right, I needed some degree of logic or rationality, which is a property of the negative mind, right? But the subconscious doesn't have that, right? So if you say don't do something to the subconscious, it doesn't use its intelligence to kind of figure out what you really meant, right? So that's very important, right? So if I say don't do something stupid, right, the subconscious doesn't interpret that to say, oh, he wants to say something very smart and impress him, let me charge up to help him do that, right? No, the intention, don't say something stupid, right, would require, that's what I really mean by it on a conscious level, but it requires some degree of intelligence to interpret it that way, and the subconscious doesn't have that. So how does the subconscious mind interpret a not command, right? If I say don't say something stupid, what's the response of the subconscious and how does it charge up? Well, this is something I actually thought about, when I was studying all of this for the first time, and I was like, I recognized that my subconscious is quantized, responds to the command component of my intention and charges up in a very specific way. So I was curious, I really was thinking about it. If I say don't do something and there's a million ways not to, what does the subconscious do? It does something, right? It doesn't really just do this. It doesn't do random things to carry out the command. So this is my interpretation or my assessment, right, or theory of what happens when you produce a not statement. So just to read this, not statements cause the subconscious to charge in a way that enhances one's ability to avoid something and feel bad when getting closer to the said thing, and better when they're getting further away from it. So that's my interpretation. Obviously, I'll break that down. This kind of description of a particular response from an intention, this is probably a little bit different from the way we normally talk about them. And that's because not statements are a little different. This is more or less, this kind of description or formalism is closer to, it would be best to talk about in terms of what I call a subconscious path, right? So that's a new kind of formalism, which we haven't talked about yet. We're going to talk about that in the next chapter, chapter 13. And that path formalism is more useful for talking about performance, right? But we're really going to talk about it then. But it's a little bit useful also in this case, right, to talk about this. But let's break that down. So where this idea basically comes from is from where I kind of came up with this interpretation is from the attention principle, right? So what do I say about the attention principle? We talked about that in chapter 7. So basically, the attention principle basically just says that you can't think about something without drawing some of your attention to it first, right? And we basically went through the idea of that. And when you produce an intention, it always has a subject component, which is the main point of focus. And in order to focus on it, right, you have to draw some of your attention to that subject. So it's impossible to think about something or produce an intention about something without drawing some of your attention to it first. So let's say I want to hold the intention, right, to not say something stupid. What do I have to do? I have to put some of my attention to what it means to say something stupid, right? Remember, the subconscious is specifically responding, it defines words completely differently, and it's responding specifically to the command component of the conscious mind. And then it uses the concept of a subject to organize subconscious memories. So if I say, don't say something stupid, right, there's basically two parts to that, to the subconscious. There's the don't part, and then there's the say something stupid part. So we're going to actually look at both parts and kind of put it together to interpret how the subconscious responds. So the first part is the something stupid part, or say something stupid, right? Something stupid is an expression of the subconscious command. I have to draw some of my attention toward the idea that something is stupid before I can make some type of other command related to it. But here's the problem. Remember what we said about the idea of something being stupid is basically, you can think of it as an abstract command, right? It expresses the relationship between some set of things in a way that says this doesn't make sense to say. So that's an abstract type of command, and it expresses a relationship. Now remember what we said, in order to perceive a relationship, your subconscious has to be on a certain frequency to alter your perception to perceive that relationship. So if something's stupid, right, even if I don't want to say something stupid, in order to express a command about it, I have to be able to alter my perception to perceive what a stupid thing is. I can't just go by the conscious mind's definition, right? So I have to go by the subconscious definition of what something stupid is, which is based on the command component. Right, so it doesn't matter what language you're speaking verbally, it's the exact same word is expressed on a subconscious level. So in order to think about something being stupid, I have to alter my perception to perceive something stupid, right? But that's exactly what I didn't want, right? So I didn't want to think about stupid things. I want to avoid that. But if I alter my perception to perceive something stupid, then it switches to what you might think of as stupid frequency, right? Which is what I wanted to avoid. But I'll get into that in a moment. But so basically, in a nutshell, you could say in the statement don't say something stupid, right? The say something stupid part causes my subconscious to switch to what we might call the stupid frequency, right? And it alters my perception to perceive what a stupid thing is. And so what does the don't part add, or don't say something stupid part add? Or don't say, what does that part add? Well, the way I've sort of focusing on my own subconscious response and what I think other people are doing, the way I've come to interpret it is that it causes the subconscious to say that this thing, which is something stupid in this case, is bad, right? It's bad for me. And if it happens, it's really bad, right? And if I can get away from it, or if it doesn't happen, then that's good, right? So that's how I've perceived it, right? So if you kind of put both things together, what ends up happening is your subconscious charges at a frequency, which allows you to not only perceive things that are stupid, it charges in a way that causes you to perceive it as bad, right? If you get closer to expressing something or in a way that's stupid, and you feel better if you're further away from expressing something that's stupid. So basically the way I describe that is you can kind of see that this sounds a little bit similar to the anxiety frequency, or even a little tiny bit of the danger frequency, which has to do with risk. And so that's kind of why you kind of, if you kind of remember experiences you've had where you're like, don't say this, don't say this, don't do that, don't do this. Doesn't it feel, you might remember feeling a little bit anxious or like you have a little bit of anxiety. That's because of the way your subconscious responds to those kind of commands, right? And if you, let's say you're in an interview and you really don't want to say something stupid, you don't want to mess up, you keep holding intention, don't do this, don't do that, right? Make sure to do this. You might, and if you could say make sure to do this, but you can even express that in a negative way, right? And so when you keep doing that, you feel a lot of anxiety, you feel a lot of anxious. Now, what's actually happening on a conscious level? Let me see if I wrote that. No, before we go over this point, what's happening on a conscious level is your subconscious is actually charging. So one, it's charging up in a way that alters your perception to keep seeing the things you don't want, right? Because like I said, from the attention principle, in order to say you don't want something, you have to put your attention on the thing you didn't want. Otherwise, you can't express an intention that says not to want it, right? So your attention has to go to the thing you don't want. Now, the moment it does that, your subconscious will charge up and alter your perception to perceive the thing you don't want. So now you perceive what you don't want everywhere. And it's super easy to think about what you don't want. That's like all that's coming in your mind, the things you don't want, because you expressed an intention that focuses on what you don't want, and your subconscious altered your perception to see that. And the more it charges up to alter your perception to see that, the more that's all you're going to see. And then the don't want part causes you to feel really anxious or bad if you feel like you're getting really close to the thing you don't want, which, like I said, is very similar to the anxiety frequency. So in other words, if you're in an interview and you say, if you keep thinking about what you don't want, and then, don't say this, don't say that, don't say that, right? All you're going to start coming to your mind, and this is also has to do with your creativity, all that's going to start popping into your mind is everything you don't want. So you're technically, it's like you're going to become an expert at knowing what to avoid, right? You're going to see them easily, what you shouldn't do, what you should don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. And you're going to be an expert at it, which is basically what you charge your subconscious to do, is focus on the everything you don't want. And so that's what it did for you, right? And the reason you're feeling anxious is because if you're in an interview and you're talking, right, and maybe let's say it doesn't go a certain way, or you did say something stupid. Well, you said you did the expression, I don't want this, the subconscious mind interprets as saying, feel bad if it does actually happen, right? Or I feel like it's about to happen. So now you feel terrible, or you feel really, when you do something you think is stupid that you didn't want to do, you feel very bad about it. Or if you think it's about to happen, you start to feel anxious, oh no, it's about to happen, right? So what can we say overall, kind of as a summation of that description? Well, it's basically this point. So not statements generally cause the subconscious to do the opposite of what you wanted. Now, this is a very kind of, I think this is a known effect in psychology, but we're breaking it down in terms of the subconscious activity, right? So if you focus on what you don't want, right, your subconscious is usually going to charge in the opposite way. Because let's say I'm in a conversation with someone and I want to say something funny, right? Now let's say I'm in a conversation, I'm trying to think of something funny to say, and I keep saying, don't do this, don't do that, don't say something unfunny. Something comes to my mind, I say, oh no, don't do that, or don't say that, that's not funny enough, or that's not funny. make sure I don't say something funny, but I keep expressing that intention in the process of trying to come up with something funny to say. What's going to happen? My subconscious is actually going to charge in a way that makes it extraordinarily difficult to say something funny, right? So it's going to have the opposite effect of what I wanted. Now, why is it harder to think of something funny? Well, because I charge my subconscious to focus on things that aren't funny, right? In order to make an expressive statement in my mind that says not to focus on something that's not funny or something unfunny, right? I know that's a double negative. Double negatives don't work. That doesn't work that way with the conscious mind. With the subconscious. But if I express an intention that says, don't say something unfunny, I have to draw my attention to what an unfunny thing is. That doesn't mean, that the word itself doesn't mean anything to my subconscious. It's the command component, right? So if something's unfunny, my subconscious has to charge to alter my perception to perceive an unfunny thing. So if I keep expressing that intention, all I can see are things that aren't funny. But that's not what I wanted. I wanted to focus on funny things, right? So funny things aren't going to come to my mind now because all I'm thinking about are unfunny things. So it makes me not creative. I actually lose the ability to actually say funny things when I keep thinking about not saying funny things. So it charges in the complete opposite way of what I wanted. And this happens all the time. I see this, like I said, I see the world very differently from a lot of people because I see it in terms of all of these principles of the subconscious, including many of them that we haven't even talked about yet, especially in the spirituality section. So this is like kind of one of the things I see all the time that I feel like a lot of people don't think about on a conscious level. And so I actually use a new term to talk about this principle, right? The idea that when you produce a not statement in your intention, it causes your subconscious to charge in a way that has the opposite effect. There's a term I use called subconscious dissonance. So where does subconscious dissonance come from? That's actually just a term that comes from psychology, right? So psychology, they have the term dissonance. Dissonance, if my memory serves me, basically just means when you have two contradictory desires, right? So let's say you want to go outside, but you don't. Let's say it's really cold outside, so you want to go outside, but you don't want to be in the cold, right? So you're experiencing a form of dissonance, right? You're not sure which one you want to do. Both intentions are contradictory. So I actually look at something very similar in terms of the subconscious mind. I just call it subconscious dissonance. So subconscious dissonance, just to go over this, it occurs when the negative mind produces a command that the positive mind interprets in an unintended and undesired way. So in a nutshell, it's like the conscious mind, when it expresses commands, sometimes it'll express it in a way that makes sense to the negative mind or to the conscious mind, but expresses in a way that doesn't make any sense. Well, it doesn't make sense to the positive mind or the subconscious mind in the way the negative mind was hoping, and it leads to an effect that causes a problem. So it leads to an undesired effect, and we basically already spoke about it, right? So if you're in a conversation and you keep holding the intention that says, "Don't say something unfunny," you don't mean that you just want to focus on unfunny things, right? So the only thing you want to come to your mind is something that's not funny. You don't care what you do as long as you didn't do the thing that's unfunny. That's not what you mean. You don't mean it like this, right? What you really mean to say is you want to think of funny things. You want to be able to crack jokes and make interesting conversation in a way that makes people laugh or whatever. But the subconscious mind didn't interpret it that way, right? If you want your subconscious to do that, which comes from transcendental creativity, you have to produce an intention which causes your subconscious to charge in that way, right? To do that, your conscious mind has to think in subconscious minded terms, or has to think in terms of subconscious language, right? That's what I'm teaching you how to do, right? So we're going to learn how to do that with transcendental creativity in the next chapter. But if you don't know those things, right, you might just produce intention in a very negative-minded way, right? So, for example, if I tell someone else, don't say something that's not funny, that person, using their logic and rationality, which is this point, would interpret that generally, based on the context and the conversation, to know That I mean, say something funny, right? Try to be cool, things like that. The subconscious mind doesn't have that interpretation. It lacks the logic and rationality to make sense of it. So the subconscious mind is going to interpret it differently from how the negative mind meant it, and is going to charge in a way that has the opposite effect. So that's actually that's what I call subconscious dissonance, right? And like I said, that occurs all the time. I see it all over the place, where I get the sense that people are producing an intention in a way that has the opposite effect because they're thinking in terms of the way the conscious mind thinks. So a good example of that, and I just write it here, is that it occurs in relationships. So if you're watching this, I expect you to be an adult, a grown-up. You've probably had many relationships, romantic or otherwise, right? And you probably experienced this. So in a relationship, a lot of times, something will happen. When a relationship's new and there's no negative memory, it's perfectly wonderful. You could charge the love emotion based on the subject, which is your girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever. And you charge the love emotion, and that emotion charges very easily. So the beginning of a relationship is wonderful, right? And then negative memory sets in, subconscious entropy occurs. You starts to be harder and harder and harder for your subconscious to be stimulated, or it becomes less volatile, right, to the person you're focused on. And then it takes a lot more effort to do something to feel a lot of emotion or be emotionally stimulated. Now, when that occurs, and I don't think I mentioned it before, when do I want to talk about it now? I'll go over it real quick. I think I did put in the book, but I forgot to talk about it. When something starts to get old to you, right? You might notice you start to get more annoyed by it, right? It's like it's easy to get annoyed. And where that comes from is because almost on a subconscious level, you're kind of recognizing that it's becoming more difficult to feel more emotion. And so it feels like you're kind of getting smothered, right? And that's versus what you were expecting. So when something's new, the subconscious flows, so it's highly volatile. And so you feel emotion very easily. But when it starts to become old, you can kind of tell on a subconscious level it's taking more and more work, and that's annoying you. You're like, I should feel more from the effort I'm giving. So you start to charge the annoyance frequency. And so that's why you might notice that you could be around someone that you really, really like, or you're feeling very positively emotionally stimulated by. Then like a couple of days later, you just feel annoyed by them for some reason, right? That's because negative memory is kicking in. It's kind of working against what you're expecting, and then you're producing an annoyance frequency in response to that subconscious entropy effect. So in relationships, right, when the relationship is new, it's wonderful, subconscious entropy occurs, and then that annoyance effect starts to kick in a little bit, right? And then eventually you guys start fighting, right? So eventually you start having some disagreements and some things like that. And then, you start fighting. And what ends up happening, this is kind of what happens in a relationship that I've noticed, right? So let's say someone has done something to besmirch you, or, besmirch your honor or whatever. They've done something that you felt was disrespectful, right? When it actually ends up happening, especially when it's the first time or it's new, you produce an intention that says that. And now that frequency becomes relatively volatile when you focus on this person, right? So when you focus on them, you feel disrespected, right? And now relationships are very difficult because it requires a lot of compromise. And so the more something like that happens, right, the more your subconscious becomes super volatile at the frequency that says this person has disrespected me or besmirched me. Now, when you're in a relationship, there's a much greater chance of that happening because of the expectations you have from that relationship versus other types of relationships, right? So as that happens more and more and more, your subconscious becomes more volatile at that frequency when you focus on this person, right? And so when you focus on them and you get maybe in a certain circumstance, and if you focus on just this circumstance with this person, let's say that was a circumstance they've disrespected you before, and you focus on it in a new situation in the future, your subconscious will sort of jump into a particular, the subconscious memory will switch to an active state, and it'll jump into a particular energy level because it's become more volatile. So you feel a strong compulsion almost to expect them to disrespect you. So what do people do in those such situations? They try to fix the relationship, right? So they keep focusing on what needs fixing, what they can do to help, what they can do to kind of repair the relationship, make it back to the way it used to be. I mean, what it used to be was without negative memory, right? That would be the right way to address it. But they keep thinking in negative-minded terms, right? They keep thinking about what's the thing I can do to make the relationship better and to heal the relationship so we're happy again. But there's a problem with doing that, right? And this is how I see it, right? And like I said, I see this all the time in relationships. If you produce an intention that says the relationship is bad and needs fixing, and you keep producing that, right, because you keep feeling bad around your partner and you want so badly to fix it, you don't want to feel bad, you want to fix what happened so you can go back to a good place. When you keep producing that intention, remember what I said, you can't think about something without drawing some of your attention to it first, right? So if you want to fix the relationship, right, because it's bad, right, you have to draw some of your attention to the idea that the relationship is bad. You have to. You can't think an intention about fixing something unless some of your attention went to the idea that it was broken, right? And so if you draw your attention to the idea the relationship is bad or broken or whatever, your subconscious has to charge to alter your perception to perceive it that way, right? Now, if you do that, if you keep producing this intention to fix it, what's going to happen? You're going to keep charging your subconscious to see the relationship is broken or bad, right? And then the not part, I don't want the relationship to be bad part, is going to cause you to keep feeling bad or worse when you feel like the relationship is bad or you feel like it's going to a place or something's about to happen that's going to sort of show you that it's bad or express what you mean by bad. And so in other words, the constant effort to fix a relationship actually ends up making it worse, because when your perception is constantly altered to perceive the relationship as bad, there could be a million good things that are going on in a relationship that you just can't see because your perception is not altered to see it. Remember what I said about transcendental perception. It gets easier to keep things that support some belief in your mind and harder to keep things that don't support a belief in your mind, right? So things that don't support your belief, they can go in your mind and just go out right away. You're compelled to sort of push them away and not think them. And ideas that support a belief, you're compelled to keep them in your mind. So if you keep charging the belief that a relationship is bad, it's very easy to keep ideas in your mind that say the relationship is bad, right? Anything that the relationship makes the relationship look good, it's very hard to keep in your mind. So your partner can do things that ostensibly are very good, right? And are trying to fix a relationship good, but you're not even going to notice it, right? The second they do one bad thing, your subconscious switches to a frequency. It's very volatile at that frequency, right? Which is the frequency that says the relationship is bad. So if you do one bad thing, it switches that frequency and jumps, right, into an active state and expresses all this energy so that you perceive the relationship is bad again, right? And so it's like there's nothing they can really do, right, to kind of get you to not see the relationship as bad because you charge that frequency. By the way, when you charge the love frequency, the positive version is the opposite. A person that you're truly in love with, they can do a million bad things and it's like you don't care, right? Why? Because it's hard to keep ideas that would basically make you not in love with this person. It's hard to keep those ideas in your mind, and the thoughts you have that would make you in love with the person are easy to keep in your mind. So when you're in love with a person, they could do bad things all day and you still love them, they're still amazing, they're still all that. So you see the opposite effect based on the frequency. And so the real way to fix a relationship, for one, I mean, not really talking about, you would actually have to do work in the relationship itself, but emotions really work internally. So this is kind of what I was saying before in the beginning of these videos, right? Emotions aren't really things that are a function of the external world. You can actually have someone who treats you terribly and still charge your subconscious to be in love with them and see them as an amazing person if you want to. So it's really up to you. There's really nothing they could do to stop you from having that perception. And if you charge your perception to see them as an amazing person, right, then that's what they're going to look like to you, right? Because your subconscious will listen to your command and alter your perception to see that, right? So it's important to recognize in relationships that's a much bigger part of the solution is just going to be how you choose to charge your subconscious. Very little they can do to really control that. Right? Now you want to obviously choose wisely, right, who you charge your subconscious to perceive in a positive way, but It's really mostly up to you. Like I said, when you focus on someone, subconscious entropy happens. There's very little they can do to continuously stimulate your subconscious in a bad way. They can do it with negative things in a way because of anxiety, right? The anxiety frequency helps your subconscious to charge in a negative way. And they can also do it with the danger frequency, which is why girls like sort of the bad boy types and things like that. But a lot of times in a relationship, when none of that's happening, subconscious entropy occurs and just kind of really goes into this middle ground, which you don't feel much of anything, right? And some things you do here and there might cause you to charge a little bit of subconscious energy. Subconscious entropy happens again, and then it just goes back to kind of normal. And then when you have all these expectations and things like that, you charge sort of negative frequencies. Those actually pre-charge a lot too. Because if someone does something bad, you might think like, oh, that was a bad thing. But then you might take your mind off of it really quickly. And if that keeps happening, you actually pre-charge it. And we'll talk a little bit about that phenomenon in chapter 14, because I want to talk about that in the context of something else. But just as you can see, subconscious dissonance happens a lot in relationships. And like I said, that's something that I've noticed for a while now. Similarly, like we already kind of went over this example, but if when you're trying to impress someone in a creative way, right? And another example, so we kind of talked about the conversation and interviews. If you want to be very creative, right, and you keep holding the intention not to do this and not to do this, that actually has the opposite effect. It makes you less creative in the way that you want it. So we talked about it in the case of interviews, but what I noticed is this also happens in boxing, right? So like I said, I watch a lot of boxing. Well, I used to. I'm kind of busy now. Boxing nowadays is not really that special, right? So it's not as good as it used to be. I still watch fights here and there. But I've noticed in boxing, and like I said, I know subconscious energy like the back of my hand, right? So I feel like I can just look at people and kind of know what frequency on, how much they're charged up and all that. There's a lot of things I can tell just from looking at someone about what's going on in their subconscious. At least I feel like I can. But I'll see fights, right, where a person can even start off the fight well or start it off okay, and you can tell on a subconscious level they haven't lost confidence yet. They still think they can win. But as the fight goes on, let's say that they're losing or the other fighter is getting points, you can see them start to lose confidence. So what's actually happening on a conscious level? What they keep thinking is that I can't lose more points or I can't get hit again. I can't do, no matter what happens, I can't do this. There's the problem with thinking that, right? You have to draw your attention to the idea of you getting hit, right? Or the idea of you losing points. And what ends up actually happening is your subconscious charges to perceive that idea. So all that's entering your mind is what you're not supposed to do during the fight. And that's not what you wanted. You wanted your subconscious to charge up in a way that helps you to fight and land hits, right? While avoiding getting hit. And I see it all the time, right? When a fighter starts to get hit and they start to lose confidence, they just keep focusing on what they're not supposed to do. And they start to become very, what's the word I'm looking for? Inhibited, right? Now remember what I said, when you subconscious dissonance charges, it's when your conscious mind makes a command that the subconscious misinterprets and leads to an undesired outcome. But what I really meant to say was this: when you charge using a not statement, it causes your subconscious to have the opposite effect of what you wanted. So when you focus on not getting hit and not losing points, it's very similar. Actually, I'm sorry, I meant to talk about this. So those cause your subconscious to charge in a way that's very similar to the anxiety frequency. Now, the anxiety frequency is very inhibiting, right? So when you feel a sense of anxiety, you feel like you just want to run out of there, right? And if you can't run, you feel relatively inhibited and very still. And you could get into fight or flight. It still enhances you in that way, but you feel a sense of inhibition, like you can't do something. And that's exactly what happens in fighting. So when people in boxing, when people charge this intention to not get hit and not lose points, all they can see is what they're not supposed to do. So they keep hesitating and being inhibited because they keep seeing what they're not supposed to do. Like, don't do that, so they stop. And they say, their mind says, don't do that, so they stop again because they don't want to do that. They're not seeing what they're supposed to do, right? And so that's another form of subconscious dissonance that happens in fighting, where I see it all the time, right? And then it's very hard. The more it charges, because they keep thinking in a negative-minded way, right? They're not thinking in terms of the subconscious mind, so they're experiencing subconscious dissonance. They lose the fight. They just keep losing the fight more and more and more, and it's very hard for them to get their confidence back in the fight because they're charging their subconscious, right? So, like I said, when you charge the energy, it lingers around. It doesn't just go away right away. And so the more it keeps charging during the fight, the more their perception gets altered, the more of an urge they feel to think in a way that matches the frequency of their subconscious, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. So that's something especially as you get more used to charging your subconscious and experiencing what it's like to alter your perception, and you get used to charging your subconscious after the new phase, like I said, which is a more general role for using your subconscious, then I want you to basically start seeing things in the real world and thinking in terms of subconscious dissonance. And I guarantee you're going to start to notice it everywhere, just like I do. Right? You're going to notice people all the time that keep producing intention that makes sense to the negative mind, but is not interpreted properly by the subconscious, and it always leads to the opposite of what they wanted. So what is the solution to subconscious dissonance? What are you supposed to do to get let's say you don't want to say something stupid, right, in a conversation. Well, how would you charge your subconscious to do the right thing, right? Let's say you want to say something smart and impressive or clever. That's what you really meant when you said don't do something stupid. Well, there's two parts to the solution. So the first part, or the first solution, is to simply not think about what you don't want. And what I mean by that, because it sounds very simple, right? But I'm actually meaning that in more of a set theory kind of way. So a not statement to the subconscious, right, not to the conscious mind, but a not statement to the subconscious mind is actually when you just don't think about it, right? Because remember what I said, in order to think about something, to produce some type of command about something, you have to draw your attention to it first. That already is a problem, right? So if you don't want to say something stupid, then you can't draw any of your attention to the idea of saying something stupid. So a proper not statement for the subconscious is when no part of your attention is on it. Now remember, your attention's a quantity, right? So you can put an amount of it on a particular subject. You can put all 100% of your attention on some idea, or you can put only a piece of it on some idea where the rest of it goes to other places. You want all 100%, or put another way, you want 0% of your attention to be on the thing you don't want. That's how you perform a proper not statement for the subconscious. There's a million things I'm not thinking about right now, right? So if I don't want to say something stupid, then none of my attention can be on the idea of saying something stupid. It just has to not be in my mind anywhere in that particular moment. Right now, I'm performing a not statement on the idea of a car, right? So just before I thought about it, I wasn't thinking about cars at all. So that was a not statement. Don't think about cars. Food, right? So the idea of a burger, right? My mind, just before I thought about it, wasn't on the idea of a burger. So that was a not statement. So not statements are to the subconscious are just when none of your attention is on something. Now, you might say that what's probably very evident is that you can't actively perform a not statement for the subconscious. And that's a well-known idea in psychology. That's not really new. But we're just putting these in subconscious terms. And so what I mean by that is I can't think like, okay, don't think about a burger. I had to think about a burger to express the idea to not think about a burger. And my subconscious altered my perception to think about a burger when I made that statement. So all it did for the not part of the conscious mind or the negative mind commands is just say, feel bad if I feel like I'm getting close to a burger or something. That's how I interpreted that part. So the proper way to not think about a burger, or the only way you can perform a not statement for the positive mind is to do it passively. There's no way to actively not think about something. So I can't say, I'm about to not think about this. I'm going to think about it by doing that. I have to passively do it, which means I just have to draw my attention to other things until at some point my attention just completely goes off the thing I don't want, right? So that's the first solution to subconscious dissonance, right? Or performing a not statement, right? And I had to learn how to do this when I had a lot of anxiety from my sleep apnea, which we're going to talk about anxiety later. But Anxiety is a little different because that comes from the body. We'll explain it in more detail. But if there's something that's making you anxious, you'll notice you just don't feel any of that anxiousness when your mind finally gets off of it. You can't keep your mind on it and try to find some way to approach it in a way that doesn't make you anxious, right? Because, technically you can, but you would have to, the charge would still be there, so it'll be difficult. We'll talk a little more about that later. But for now, the basic idea is you want to get your mind off of thoughts or thinking about it in a way that makes you anxious. You can't think about it in a way that makes you anxious and then somehow find a way to overcome it. Well, no, you already expressed an intention that caused your subconscious to switch the anxiousness frequency. So you just have to think about it in a way that doesn't make it seem anxious to you. And that's forming a not statement on basically anxiousness relative to that subject. But that's not always enough, right? So if I just don't want to feel anxious, if I'm willing to feel anything else except anxious, it's no problem. Then you get this kind of interpretation, and all I got to do is not think about it in a way that makes you anxious. I can think about it a million other ways. But if I want to actually proactively do something, so let's say I don't want to think about something stupid, instead I want to say something very clever, right? Then this is not going to be enough to just keep my attention off stupid things, right? I can say a million things that aren't clever and satisfy that command. So the second solution, or part of the solution, is to focus on what you do want. So if I want to say something clever in conversation, I have to produce an intention that says, say something clever. This is going to be clever. Now, how you do that is more or less something we're going to talk about in the next chapter, because that has to do with creativity. And that's actually a bit tricky to explain. That we're going to explain a lot more than this. It has to do with subconscious organization. And we haven't gone over that yet. So, but yeah, you would have to produce an intention that gets your subconscious to charge in a way that does make you say clever things. And so you have to produce intentions related to the command of say something clever. It's not enough to just not keep your mind on the idea of something stupid. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I know that was a lot. I probably should have broken this video up in two, but in the book, this is all one section. But yeah, so we're now, so this stuff is important. It's important to understand how not statements, or how the subconscious responds to not statements. So you want to, when you start controlling your subconscious, so we already talked about charging now. So as you get more used to controlling your subconscious and using it for things, you want to be cognizant of how it responds to when you hold an intention to not do something or don't do this, right? Because it's generally going to charge in a way that's the opposite of what you wanted, right? And then you also want to be aware of subconscious dissonance, where you don't want to think or keep producing intentions in a very negative-minded way that the subconscious is going to completely misinterpret and charge in a way you don't want, right? It's going to lead to an undesired outcome. So you just want to be aware of that when you're controlling your subconscious. You want to generally think in a more proactive way when you're controlling your subconscious. And just, if you do want to perform a not statement on some type of thought, you just have to try to keep focusing on other things until you find that you're just no longer thinking about it, right? There's no way to actively not think about something for the subconscious. So yeah, that's it. In the next video, we're going to talk about the role your attention plays in charging, and you're going to see that you can make your charge even more intense than what we really talked about in the last chapter by controlling the level of attention you draw towards something, right? So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.